something like 5. Is that fine?
5:45 is what I was told, Jitendra ji.
Because I thought because there may be some rush in the traffic and all
please,
that.
Please, Jitendra ji, jitna aap push kar sakein, please kar dijiyega. I'd be grateful. I'm very tight on doing this. We just had a technical problem today that we had so many webinars happening at CSE. We sort of over-anticipated our thing, but we really need you there. So I will really request you, as long as you can stay, I'd be grateful, and I will keep it very tight, I promise. We will reduce the time for everyone. We definitely want to, this is a very important issue that we want to discuss, but thank you for warning me on this.
Maybe you can put the questions to me.
I will.
I'll do than other members, so that at least I have finished my part, and then I try to push as much as possible to be here. But in case, in case I have to go, I would have covered most of the portion from my side.
It's just that, why you are particularly important is that, as you have understood, is that you're actually the man who's going to help us to see this way ahead. So, so that's why we're holding on to you, because we need you to help us to see how do we move ahead. I mean, I appreciate this, and I will call on you first, but then I would request you that we will keep bothering you on this, because this is an issue we want to be able to find resolution.
Always. AMR is a big problem, and definitely we will be there to help.
Good. So let's let in people. We've got people. Oh, we've got people already in. Good.
Sunita, this is Balganesh. I have a tight stop at 1 hour 15 minutes.
Okay. So Balganesh, you want to leave after an hour and a half. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, around that, yes.
No, I will finish. It's a tight webinar. Idea is to get the issues out, and particularly to put a face to some of the very important companies which have a point of view in terms of how to move ahead. And that was the reason why we are doing this webinar. So, and this is not the beginning or the end of the conversation. It's a way to kickstart it. I think, so Kanya, has everyone's voice, face all visible?
Yes,
Balganesh, if you can lift yours. Yes, perfect. And the rest, I think, is fine. So I'm actually, there's a lot of people who joined. Welcome everybody to the second of our series in our workshop on Amit and Rajeshwari. If I can ask you to keep yourselves videos on, it'll be good, because then everybody knows. This is the second in our series on the issue of really the shrinking pipeline of new and novel antibiotics. As some of you who may have joined our first webinar would have heard, it is an issue of very big concern. I am a member of the Global Leaders Group, and one of the things that we have flagged at the GLG also is that not only do we have a crisis, a silent pandemic, that we are seeing resistance grow from medicines which are life-giving, which are so critical, but we are also equally worried that the world is equally worried that there aren't enough new and novel antibiotics which will be available for human use. So we have a crisis both in terms of conservation of the old, but also to bring more medicines which are important on the table. Our analysis showed, and Gauri will explain that a little more, is that it's also a crisis in terms of large companies moving out of the business and medium and small companies not being able to take the novel medicines that they are working on to the market. and what are the problems, what are those conditions. So in the first webinar, we flagged the issue. In this one, we particularly, and this was kind of a new, we hadn't planned it when we did the series. We've added this because we realized what is really missing is to understand from industry in itself. What's going wrong? Why is it not happening? What needs to be done? And to listen to this, to be able to evolve then the responses that are needed in the world as we move ahead. And that's why we are looking at this. And then the next one we will look at is the whole issue of, can antimicrobials be considered a global public good? What is a global public good? How does it work? Is that one way to move ahead? And that then we will bring to culmination in a webinar which really wraps this up to see what have we learned from you? Are there other approaches that can be looked at? And then what we want to be able to say in terms of the way ahead. So that's the series and a quick update on that. I will now request my colleague Gauri to give us a presentation on the CSE work, which is led by Amit Khurana and Rajeshwari and Gauri, to highlight our concerns. And then I will call upon the panelists and introduce them. Gauri, given everybody's time constraint, I'd be grateful if you could keep it very short.
Absolutely, ma'am. Thank you. I'll definitely do that. Let me just first share my screen. Yeah. So I hope all of this is visible.
Yes.
So my name is Gauri Arora. I work at the Sustainable Food Systems team at CSE, and I'll be presenting this on behalf of the entire AMR team here at CSE. So this presentation, just a second, this presentation would largely be focusing on the key findings and observations from our story that we submitted to Down to Earth, but with a focus on the small and medium scale antibiotic developers. So first of all, just a second. So we are currently, in terms of the antimicrobial resistance, we're currently facing three main crises. First of which is that the antibiotics are becoming ineffective. Existing antibiotics are losing their strength to kill the bacteria because they're becoming resistant to them. Critically important antibiotics are now not able to kill the bacteria, which is leading to more expensive antibiotics to be needed. And in general, the treatment options are becoming limited. We now move to the second crisis, which is the antibiotic development crisis. So no new class of antibiotic has been developed since the 1980s, especially against the gram-negative bacteria. Also, the antibiotics that were developed in the last decades, it said that they're not able to meet the unmet medical needs. This leads us to the third crisis, which is the issue of access. The antibiotics that are developed or that are being developed are not accessible everywhere. They're not reaching to the people who they really need to. We'll now be focusing on the second crisis, which is the antibiotic development crisis. So in order to do that, we need to look at the antibiotic development pipeline, which has been stagnant for more than 5 years now for priority pathogens. Priority pathogens, which are mostly gram-negative, are on a larger scale can reflect the unmet need. What are priority pathogens? These are 12 pathogens which are antibiotic resistant, which are categorized into critical, high, and medium priority by the WHO in 2017 in order to better guide the global antibiotic research. If we now focus on the current global antibiotic development pipeline, as per the WHO database, which focuses on priority pathogens, the M. tuberculosis and the C. difficile, and is updated till the late of 2021, we can see that there are only 297 antibacterial candidates that are currently under preclinical and clinical pipeline. There's 217 candidates in preclinical, and there are 77 candidates in the clinical pipeline. Within this clinical pipeline, there are about 45 traditional molecules, which are agents that act by directly targeting components which are necessary for bacterial growth to kill the pathogen. At the same time, there are 32 non-traditional molecules, which are agents that lack intrinsic antibacterial activity and work through other means. They might be able to complement the traditional molecules, but they might not be able to substitute them entirely. If I move back now to the 45 traditional molecules, as of now, only 28 of them are targeting the WHO priority pathogen. This antibacterial pipeline is considered weak, fragile, dry, and even anemic by some. But one might ask that why is it so when there are 297 candidates? This is because it is minuscule in comparison to the medicines which are under clinical development for other therapies, like for cancer. There are more than 10,000 candidates. There are more than 1,800 for neuropsychiatric conditions, and there are about 1,500 for endocrine, blood, and immune disorders. Now we deep dive into the antibiotic pipeline as of now, and looking at it, we'll now be able to see the near future scenario as well as the long-term scenario. Looking at the clinical pipeline for traditional antibiotic candidates, we can clearly see that only 9 of these are currently in phase 3. There are none for M. tuberculosis. There's only 1 in pre-registration, which is solithromycin. Another point that I would like to make here is that if we have a closer look at the developers in this clinical pipeline, we can clearly see that it's mostly small and medium scale developers with very little presence from the big pharma. A similar scenario is seen when we look at the clinical development pipeline for non-traditional antibiotic candidates. There are only 5 in phase 3. There are only 2 in pre-registration stage, and there are none for M. tuberculosis once again, only 1 in phase 3. Once again, looking at the developers from these, they are mostly small and medium scale with very little presence from the big players. A recent report also published in 2022 by Biotechnology Innovation Organization also mentioned that approximately 80% of these new antibiotic discoveries are reported to be from small developers. We now look at the long-term scenario, which is the preclinical pipeline, which has 217 molecules, but unfortunately, only 3 of them are in the final stages, which have filed their investigative new drug application. And only 31 are in clinical trial application, IND enabling studies. Preclinical pipeline is very important as this is going to be the one that fuels the clinical pipeline in the future. And this is too less a pool considering the high failure risk at this stage. Now, the point that I want to focus on is even if we focus on the developers of these preclinical pipeline, we see that about 84% of them, of these 217 molecules, are being developed by micro, small, and medium developers. Another interesting point here is that small and micro, which are developer organizations, which have less than 50 employees, account for about 70% of this. Unfortunately, the small and medium scale developers, which are present in both clinical and preclinical stages of antibiotic development, are struggling to develop the antibiotics and additionally making money from what they've already developed. We've seen that of the 12 antibiotic companies which have gone public in the past 10 years, only 5 are still active today. Companies like Melinta Therapeutics, Acaugen, Aradigm, all 3 of which filed for bankruptcy in 2019 due to various reasons, like their FDA approval was for one condition, but they were not able to get an approval for another condition. And recently, Nabriva Therapeutics, which announced closure in 2023. Even if a company has not gone to the extent of filing for bankruptcy, they've faced diminished value or they've cut down their workforce drastically. Like, for example, Tetraphase Pharmaceutical, which was valued at 1.8 billion in 2015, was sold at a mere 43 million in 2020. Similarly, Spero Therapeutics halted its commercialization activity of its UTI drug and laid out 75% of its staff. When these pharmaceutical companies collapsed, it took out of circulation or sharply reduced the availability of 5 of the 15 antibiotics approved by the US FDA since 2010, according to an article in Nature in 2020. So this basically gave a larger perspective from the global companies that are facing these struggles. As per the challenges that the Indian developers are facing, we'll hear from our panelists today. One might naturally ask that why is it that it's the small and medium scale companies which are in this antibiotic development phase and are facing this struggle? It's because there's been a big exodus by the high earning companies. Many companies, many pharmaceutical companies that were pioneers in antibiotic development have vacated this space many years ago. CSE did an analysis of the world's big 15 high earning companies, and we analyzed their clinical pipeline to better understand the situation which is currently observed. What we saw is that out of these 15 companies, it was just 4 companies that even had antibacterial products in their pipeline. Another important point that we can see here is collectively, these 15 companies pulled in about 124 billion in 2022 in R&D. If not antibiotics, then where is the focus of these big companies? Doing a deep dive analysis of their clinical pipeline, we saw that out of the 1,007 molecules in the clinical pipeline of these 15 companies, it was only 13 candidates that were antibacterial, 8 of which were being developed by just one company. 411 candidates were found to be being developed for cancer, 150 for immunology, allergy, inflammation, or respiratory diseases, 84 for cardiology, metabolism, or renal diseases. This big exodus is not just because of high risk, low return, which is often cited by the market failure, but it's also because of profits in other areas, as is reflected greatly through blockbuster drugs in profitable areas like cancer, autoimmune disorders, metabolic diseases, etc. Understanding the landscape of understanding the antibiotic development landscape, I would like to now touch upon what can be done to help the companies which are involved in antibiotic development research. There's a growing consensus on the need to support antibiotic R&D through investments. We have broadly 2 types of approaches as of now, push and pull. What are push incentives? These are involved in the funding of early stage of antibiotic development from discovery to clinical trials. They provided direct support through grants, loans, and tax incentives. It involves nonprofits, industries, governments. In this incentive, funders share a risk of failure and can help bring down the development costs. Some examples of push funders include CARBAX, GARDP, the AMR Action Fund. Now moving on to the pull incentives, which are for a developed drug. They provide a known return on investment to those who have already developed a novel antibiotic and help bring it to the market. Examples are the market entry rewards, tradable exclusivity vouchers, accelerated approvals. This incentive is largely driven by governments. They don't really address the risk of failure in the early stage development. US, UK, Japan, Sweden, France, Germany are some of the countries which are considering the pull incentive. In 2020, the UK did implement a pilot of a subscription model. And similarly, Sweden also piloted a partially dealing reimbursement model. But in the end, after about a decade of push incentives, it is still clear that their success has been less than required. They're not enough, and they do need to be supplemented. In terms of pull incentives, on the other hand, the impact is initiated because it's initiated in recent years. Their impact still remains to be seen. I would now like to drive your attention to CSE's take on critical reforms, basically, that would be needed to stimulate the antibiotic R&D ecosystem for sustainable and equitable antibiotic access. Starting with the fact that there is a greater public finance and reforms which are needed in relation to market reimbursement, regulatory approval, cost of new antibiotics, and clinical trial. Governments will have to play a greater role. Policymakers need to be aware about the financing rationale and needs. Secondly, I would like to focus on the fact that governments need to come together for a coordinated response in terms of prioritizing antibiotics and developers. Unless major economies, for example, like the countries in G20, come together, individual country efforts will have limited long-term gains. There's a need to strike the right balance in public-private partnerships for antibiotic development. There's a notion that government should take up the entire antibiotic development is not backed by many. On the other hand, just public financing, it should not be just about bringing back the big pharma companies. There's a role of countries like India with big antibiotic generic industry that provide access to cheap antibiotics across borders to be reflected upon. I would close the presentation with a very important thought, that I think it's time to now consider antibiotics as a global public good. What are public goods? They are non-excludable, meaning that they're made available to any, and they're non-rivalrous, meaning that they can be enjoyed over and over again without anybody diminishing the benefits they deliver to others. They can be local, national, or global. And I would like to leave with the thought that even though antibiotics may not fit the strictest definition of a global public good, but their benefit to society makes them as close to a global public good as one can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you very much, Gauri. Very, very well put. I know that Mr. Kumar has a flight to catch, and so I hope it is okay with Vasan. I'm going to actually ask Jitendra to start off. I think Gauri has given a good landscape, and then we will get back to a more detailed discussion with the companies. But Jitendra ji, even as I ask you and we let you go because of your flight, I hope that you will allow us to come back to you based on today's conversation, what then needs to be done. So let me introduce Mr. Jitendra Kumar. He is the Managing Director of the Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, which is a DBT council, which will help us to understand what really, how do you respond to this crisis? This is an apparent, clear crisis. And clearly, how can DBT and CDFT work with industry, and what are you doing currently? Jitendra ji.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and very nice presentation. Before that, it covers very many levels of, many grounds have been covered. And definitely, I agree that it should be a public good. Antibiotics availability should be a public good, considered as public good. But at the same time, we know that antibiotic resistance and all has played a vital, very important adverse role in developing this field. But at the same time, it has thrown out a lot of opportunities also for innovation. So while I'm agreeing to be, it should be available as a public good, but at the same time, we have to also see how do we incentivize new innovations, because these are a little bit contradictory, because if the innovations have to be funded or innovations have to come out, definitely it will have its intellectual property rights and the returns on investments, etc., will come into picture from the corporate world. However, if government has to intervene, and which we have already done in many cases, is that we can fund the initial research. Okay, so that's how Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, BIRAC, which is a body of Department of Biotechnology, was formed to actually spur innovations. Now, AMR is a very, very burning issue, and definitely we also have put a lot of emphasis on creating new antibiotics so that AMR crisis is a little bit tackled. So to this effect, we have come out with specific calls for AMR. What does this call mean? It means that we have shown to public and research institutions that we are willing to fund your proof of concept stage, or even at a different level, we will fund you if you have some innovative concepts in mind, which is backed by a good science and a good business. So we have come out with AMR calls. Even if the specific calls are out of picture, if we don't consider them, then also the first stage of funding that we give is Biotic Ignition Grant, which is called BIG. Actually, is for any innovator who has some innovative idea that will fund proof of concept level. It includes AMR. So in fact, we have received lot of applications for antibiotics, development resistance and all, how to circumvent it in general calls as well as specific AMR calls, and many have been funded. However, as you can understand, AMR and new antibiotics, etc., development requires something of a good amount of time is required to create a pipeline of good, antibiotics. So the funding has to be sustained in a sustained manner. It's not that we have given proof of concept funding and then we forget, and then these companies and startups have no wherewithal to go to scale up or to at least go to the next level. So for that, we have come out with several schemes like Biotechnology Industry Promotion Program, BIP. We have CIBRI grants. So these are all mostly grants actually in the range of, so if Biotech Ignition grant is for 50 lakhs rupees for 18 months, something like that, then BIPP and CIBRI grants would be in crores, 5 crore, up to 5 crore, It may be more also, but we have not gone beyond 5 crores, And then we have product commercialization grants where technologies have reached a commercial level and now we want to help them. So at all levels, you can see that we have intervened from government side to spur innovation in this area. Also, apart from this, even if company, for example, has come out with proof of concept and they have developed it to, and they have come all the way to the commercialization and they have acquired promotion, that product commercialization grant also. Then also, the question is how do we scale up actually, pilot scale, because it requires manufacturing. It's a huge, if we are talking about public good, it has to be produced at economies of scale. So for that, we have come out with the biomanufacturing policy, where we will support the bigger companies to set up the pilot scale manufacturing plants, which can be used by these startups or innovators. Because right now, scale up is a big problem for startups. They cannot access the pilot scale facilities, etc. So definitely we will help these startup companies who are innovating this area to come up with newer products. And you must also realize that the biomanufacturing, which is the use of microorganisms, synthetic biology, to promote the synthesis of chemicals, a green chemistry, you can say, may also play a very important role in developing new antibiotics. And therefore, the whole gamut of biomanufacturing is open to be exploited by innovators to come into this area. So, and there are many intermediaries also. For example, if somebody wants to manufacture antibiotics, they may have to depend upon China for many of the intermediary products. So APIs and also why we cannot help our startups also to create the products in the intermediary zone, which will not depend upon any other country to supply. That's what Atmanirbhar Bharat and self-reliant India that we are talking about. So there are many such schemes that are there today, supported by BIRAC, which has changed the landscape of innovation in the entire country. But as we know, biotech is a very, very long drawn affair. It's not that we fund for 1 year and there is a result, 2 years, no. BIRAC was established 10 years back. And of course, there are technologies which have been gone to commercializable levels. And we have launched some products also. You must have seen our MRI scanner making the waves across the globe. developed by Voxel, a startup company which we have funded. And then mRNA technology, the vaccines, etc. Many products have been launched through Virec. But all I'm trying to say is that we are trying by all means, capturing the current expertise of the bigger companies, spurring innovations in the startups, bringing them on one platform, funding them to help newer and newer products come to the market. So these are some of the things that we are doing, and I'm sure that going forward, as you suggested, you look forward to get help from Virec. So definitely, I'm very keen to support this area, because this is of immense. It's a pandemic, actually. You say silent pandemic, I say it's a pandemic, actually. Many people are dying through this, and we don't know what they are dying of and all that. So definitely, it's a crisis, and we have to. Whatever is possible from our side, we will do. You have done a good piece of research, as evident from the public, the presentation that you made. I would request you to send the copy of this presentation, and definitely we will work on more and more on this area. Now, one small thing I would say, although it says CDFD there, actually CDFD is one of the organizations of DBT, Department of Biotechnology, which I have come for meeting here with CDFD. But since this call was there, and they have graciously given me the space to, for this video conferencing. So the CDFD logo is there. But rest assured, CDFD is also one of the DBT institutions which we work closely. So with this, I close my remarks, and if you have any further questions from you or as well as audience, I will be very happy to take those questions.
Good. Thank you, Jitendraji. What I'm going to request you is, because I know that you have a flight, if you could stay as long as you can, because I think you will hear also from some of our other panelists, some of the big issues, because the big concern we have, and your organization is doing so much, both for startups, but also for bringing this innovation on the table, is what are the gaps? And that's really where I want to bring in Vasan. Sambandha Murthy, who is the Senior Vice President of the Global Operations of Bugworks Research India Private Limited. Now, we have been hearing a lot about Bugworks and the work that you have been doing. And we really wanted, therefore, and I'm really, really grateful that you have joined this webinar, for us to hear from you. Where are the gaps? What is it that can be done, Vasan, that will help us to accelerate, which something that clearly that needs to happen, which is the innovation that is happening in companies like yours, Bugworks, but take it to scale. Vasan.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, and a lovely presentation from Gauri, right, in terms of what CSE has been doing. So there are a couple of things which probably I will focus on. Funding, we heard from Dr. Jitendra in terms of what DBT and Virec are doing in terms of funding. But what we're looking at as innovators is large scale money. Once you move to clinical development, we're talking about hundreds of crores. So that's something which is still a gap. Probably I'll focus on the other existing challenges. Second one is regulatory harmonization, right? It's a very difficult battle for an innovator company from this part of the world to go through regulatory approval process, because each global market has a very different demand and rigor. So one request as an innovator is, how can we harmonize the global regulatory aspects as well as guidelines, right? If you were to take the US FDA or the EMA or DCGI, CITSCO, how do we harmonize such that an innovator can use the same data that's being generated in India as well as globally as a single window application? That's one point. Third point is clinical trial network harmonization. India is the hotbed of AMR. We heard from the experts here. We have a lot of cases, and we do have a huge load of patient population. So really, how do we open up clinical trial testing of Indian patients for innovator drugs? So that's something which I think is very critical. and really have centers of excellence across the country, where it becomes much easier for innovators to deal less with one problem, which is how do you have access to all the clinical trial networks, data harmonization, quality, and then the approval. And the third one is we saw during COVID that accelerated approval pathways do exist, and we
Seems to be some problem with your connectivity.
Oh, am I audible? Let me turn off my video, maybe. Am I audible?
You're audible.
You're audible. We can hear you, Vasan.
Okay. So can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we would need a committee of regulatory experts focusing on AMR related issues. We know the scale of the AMR problem, right? We cannot have a generalized regulatory committee sitting there and walking through this, because they have to do a lot of handholding with innovators in terms of how do we be creative in finding solutions and taking a product beyond the finishing line. And the third part is, how do we adopt accelerated approval of antimicrobials across the globe? Several countries have very clear pathways of how a product can qualify if it's a life-saving medicine. It has certain metrics which it needs in terms of quality, attributes, and in terms of value it adds to the society and patients. In India, we need such a system which really will spur a lot of innovation and help companies which are across the discovery space. We have had push incentives coming from India. BIRAC has played an important role. Then we have global agencies like GARDP and CARBEX playing an important role. But we clearly need much bigger money in the clinical development, which is very expensive and takes a lot of time. So I will stop here and then see if there are any questions.
So before I open it up, and Vasan, in terms of, so what you're basically saying is, other than the big money, which is clearly needed for the clinical, there are things that can be done to speed up the processes, whether it is the regulatory challenges, whether it is to harmonize the trials that happen, or whether it is to invest more in the clinical trials in India itself. So I think I want just everyone to hold those thoughts, because those are very important areas that we as a group need to think about and work on as we move ahead on this, so that we don't only focus on the push and pull, but also other options. Mr. Bhagwat, if I can now bring you in. Mr. Bhagwat is Senior Vice President, Drug Discovery at WOCAD Research Center. Clearly a very important player, and someone who can help us understand very much along what Gauri, Jitendra ji, as well as Vasan have laid out are some of the challenges. Sachin, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Sunita. And of course, I agree with Vasan, the initial part, obviously, of the amount of funding that we would really need to bring a product across the finishing line. But I think what is also important to keep in mind that the problem that we are dealing, while the enormity of the problem is very well known, but I think we need to match our action in such a manner that we are able to meet this challenge in a much faster manner than that is envisaged, say, for example, for a long-term duration. So my point is that we have to look at this problem as from two angles. One is, how do we bring about novel antibiotics in a very shorter frame of mind, for shorter frame of time? And how do we support and development of antibiotics in such a manner that we are able to bring about new drugs in, say, next 2 to 3 years of time? What it means that if you look at the funding agencies all across the world, including India, I think we need to look at the projects which have an ability to provide a viable, clinically viable and well-differentiated product in a much shorter time frame. The reason being that our problem is not of tomorrow, but the problem is of today. We have a situation in Indian ICUs where 50% of patients are really dying because of MDR and XDR infections, and doctors are struggling to find out therapies where they can salvage a given patient every day. So it's a kind of a firefighting that's taking place in the ICU every day. And we need to gauge our response appropriately in a manner that, on one hand, of course, some of the projects which might have a kind of a high level of novelty, but at the cost of, to some extent, the duration it will take for the development or to some extent, even the clinical non-viability, has to be matched with the projects where there is a very high level of assurance of clinical viability and the products that can have an ability to address the unmet need for today or latest by tomorrow. So, but the approach that we have been observing in most situations is such that the support to the projects is taking in a manner in which the envisaged timeline is around, say, 10 years, 12 years down the line when the product will really see the market in terms of actual use. So we suggest, and we are of the view that I think there has to be a balance between the project selection in terms of the fact that whether a project that can bring about a viable product within 2 to 3 years is given a high level of priority so as to meet the unmet medical need in an urgent manner, and also to look at the projects where there is a potential of bringing about a kind of a path-breaking solution, but it may take time, say, for example, to 10 to 12 years, and if they are also supported. I think one of the very good examples we have here, if you look in contrast to the Carbex, for example, because Carbex has been operational for close to 7 years now, and more than 150 projects have been selected. But if you look at the project paradigm that the Carbex have, today, even after 7 years of Carbex existence, we do not have any product from the Carbex portfolio which has entered into the phase 3 stage as far as the therapeutics are concerned. So, it simply means that it will take another 4 or 5 years for these projects to see the day of the light. On the other hand, we have a wonderful experience here in India with BIRAC, and I would really compliment and thank Dr. Jitendra Kumar for this. Maybe he may not be aware upfront, but we have been one of the beneficiaries of BIRAC, in which the BIRAC helped us with around 30-35% of the cost of phase 3 for a novel antibiotic called as nafithromycin. And we are so happy to inform you that
I know it. I've seen your case. Yeah.
Yes, and so why we are happy about this is that I think we applied to BIRAC in around 2019, and by the time we were funded with the seed amount, it was 2020. And today, I'm happy to inform you that we have completed the phase 3 clinical trial, and we are on the way to file the new drug application, and potentially the drug would be available in later this year or early next year. So I think there is no other example in the world from any of the funding agency where the incubation time of the fund was less than 3 to 4 years, and you ultimately received a molecule which is a viable product, well differentiated. And why well differentiated? Because this would be the only therapy in the world which is ultra short course treatment for community acquired bacterial pneumonia caused by multi-drug resistant pathogens. Only 3-day therapy, once a day, and it will work against all the kind of pathogens which are involved in community respiratory infections. So this something is an example at a global level. If a project selection is right, how it can lead to a product which can bring about a change into the lives of the patient within 3 to 4 years of time. So one of the aspects that we expect is this from all the agencies, not only BIRAC, but even global agencies, to keep it in mind that there is a balance between supporting the projects which are long-term, more risk-prone, and of course have a potential to bring about a paradigm shift, but also those projects which can resolve the problem of tomorrow, if possible, even today. I will give another example. So this is about the phase 3 support, and what we anticipate from BIRAC is also, and of course he mentioned, Dr. Jitendra Kumar in his initial talk, that they also support the manufacturing. I will take you to another glaring example, and all of you would be surprised at what we are going through. So one of the example is about our flagship product. Why we call it flagship? Because this product has been widely accepted all over the world to have a very strong potential to provide a life-saving therapy for the treatment of critically ill gram-negative infection pathogens and the patients. Mm-hmm. This is a drug which is called as WCK-5222, composed of cefepime and zidebactam. We are currently conducting global phase 3 study with almost 30 to 40% trial already being done, but still we are around 3 years away from the product filing in US and all over the world. Now, this is a drug, and such is the profile of this drug that Indian doctors were required to reach out to drug regulator of India, CDSCO, the DCGI, to make this drug approved for the compassionate use. And for those patients which had absolutely no treatment options and they would have succumbed to the infection, for such kind of patients, this drug was used, 5 of them, and the 5 lives were saved with this drug. Now, the situation is such that we are flooded with the compassionate use request almost on a daily basis. In India, from India, we are seeing tens of them every week. And not only this, we are getting requests from all over the world. In fact, when I'm speaking with you today, morning we received requests from Malaysia, US, and Europe. Now, the whole paradox is that even though we would like to help the patients and the doctors with this drug on compassionate use, we do not have resources to manufacture this drug for this particular activity, because our manufacturing is all tied up with the clinical development for which the vials cannot be taken out. So this is a real world problem that a developer company faces, that on one hand, we are very much eager to supply this drug. We have supplied this drug free of cost to all the patients for the compassionate use. We want to do that, but we don't have resources to manufacture this drug for the compassionate use. So this kind of irony is existing in the field of antibiotics. And as a result of that, there is a multi-angular help that is required from the funding agencies. As we discussed, prioritization of the projects in terms of the project viability, and also in terms of various aspects where the drug can be made available. So these are some of the suggestions which I thought, of course, I'm very happy that Dr. Jitendra Kumar is around and our panelist. And with this, I think I would also thank BIRAC and of course DBT that they have at least come up with such kind of viable programs where there is a higher emphasis on antimicrobial resistance and specifically for the development of antibiotics. But I will also try to, because taking the opportunity of being Dr. Jitendra Kumar available in our panel, I will also highlight a little bit of the downside of the funding, specifically in terms of BIRAC, because this will be a unique opportunity for me to share our views. I think one thing that we really urge BIRAC to consider is that they must help us conduct the trial globally, not just in India. The current requirements of BIRAC are such that we can do the trials only in India and we cannot do it outside because that's not the expenses they can fund for. And this drug which we are going to launch is a unique example where there is no drug in the world of that kind. It is a drug which is a global drug cut out to help patients all over the world. In China, the resistance rate is 90% as far as these naphithromycin-relevant pathogens are concerned. But we are unable to take this drug beyond the shores of India because it was not possible to use the funds to do the offshore clinical trials. So this actually leads to a situation where we lose out on very important aspects. We lose out on showcasing our innovation to the world at a global level. We are not able to do that because we don't have a global approval. And I'm sure all of us are aware that when a drug gets approved only in India, it doesn't have an aura of a global development, doesn't have an aura of high level of innovation, which of course needs to be changed. Second, we are losing out on an opportunity where it is Indian innovation that can be exported. It is Indian drug that can be now given to all over the world. It is exactly paradoxical to the situation that we were facing a few years back when India was waiting for novel antibiotics when they were discovered in the Western world for years and years to be available to the Indian patients. So we are in a situation, a very golden moment where the whole this situation can be reversed by supplying the drug from India, innovative drugs, not the generic drugs, to all over the world, which would really bring our nation to a platform where we will be the suppliers of an innovative drug. So my request to the funding agency, particularly Dr. Jitendra Kumar, is to seriously consider our request of helping us with the offshore clinical programs and also some of the phase 1 studies which are not possible to be done because India does not have at this point in time capability to do those studies. I think these are also the studies we would seek their help so that we can take these molecules all across the globe with the help of BIRAC. So this is something which I find as some of the important aspects that can be looked at for making our program successful.
Thank you. Fascinating. And thank you very much for this. And Jitendra ji, you can see why you're so important in this and why BIRAC is so important for all of us to have with us. And clearly there is an agenda moving ahead. And I will call upon Mr. Balganesh now. But the big question for me in my head also is, and that's a question that we will continue to work on is, what have we learned from the COVID crisis and the drug development during the COVID crisis that should help us in this pandemic? And Jitendra ji is very correctly said, it's not a silent pandemic anymore. It's a pandemic. It's a health pandemic. How do we actually learn to deal with this? And what can we do better? And this is where some very interesting work is clearly happening in India, both in terms of development, but also now the opportunity to scale up. So, Mr. Balganesh, if I can call upon you. Mr. Balganesh is the president of Ganga Gen Biotechnology. And for us, the big issue is really looking at, from what you have heard, what do you see as some of the ways ahead? Mr. Balganesh.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you, all of you, for giving me this opportunity. So we've analyzed, and Gauri's presentation was very clear, saying where are things today? There's a lack in the portfolio, but let's just step back and say, okay, we're saying this is where we were. What was it 25 years ago? What has changed? Now, if you look at how this pipeline has developed, you'll say first there is discovery, then there's translation, then there's clinical research, then there is registration, regulators and registration, and finally marketing. Which of these, at least 5, has shown a dramatic change? If you know, for example, okay, from my perspective, been in big pharma for 2.5 decades, and then moved to small biotech. So looking at both these, if you just did an analysis of these 6 different aspects, many of the problems existed even before. The problem did not change. Where I think there has been a dramatic change is in the marketing aspect, in the commercialization. And that has, and Gauri alluded to many reasons. One is return of investment, the time taken to harmonize marketing across many reasons. But that is an aspect which is purely out of bounds of the people who are discussing here, who have to look at the commercialization. What has that changed? For example, on one hand, yes, if you ask, there's a overarching statement you would make, is that antibiotic development and commercialization is no longer the golden fleece. It was during some periods of time, but it's no longer, which is true. But then ask yourself, is that, what are the reasons driving that? First and foremost, if you see, it's clearly a short-term treatment. So the sales are obviously limited for that. And so that's where you're doing the push and pull incentive, where you're giving from the government, you can make sure that you get an adequate price for it. The second aspect as to why this is commercialization is an issue is I'm not going to use the new antibiotic until everything else fails. So it's always going to be my backup drug. So what does that mean? That means my sales are not going to peak till way into the 7th year of launch or 8th year of launch or 9th year of launch. So I have a delayed return of investment. Yes. But is that all? No. That delayed return of investment affects my patent life. I only have a patent life for 20 years. I've lost 15 years. I've got 5 years of patent life left. And I have to recoup the money during that period of time. So if you, I think it's important to look at where have the dramatic changes been due to which we are where we are. Then I come to the first aspect, which is where we looked at the statistics in terms of number of companies which are in discovery and who are in the early pipeline. Now, why is that? And is that a skew which has happened today, or is that a skew which has happened because of the way science has so-called progressed? If you look at a period between, people say that no antibiotics since 1940 to or 1960 to 2000, there's a big gap, etc. It's actually not true. If you look at that in detail, you will find that many new antibiotics, which were chemical modifications of previously existing ones, but with better properties, were being constantly brought into the market. So the point is that aspect, what has happened to that aspect? That aspect disappeared Because in 2000, we said we'll solve all the world's problems using genomics. We know the human genome, blah, 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 this, and that didn't pan out. So that's where that change came. Now, the question you're asking me is about gaps, right? What can we do today so I think we have to break this down individually and see what has changed, and then try to address it in a more, it is not one size fits all at every stage. It's a very different solution, whether BIRAC can fund clinical trials in India or clinical trials outside. It's not going to solve the problem of commercialization. There is a 25 to 30% chance maximum success, usually 10%. Who's going to take that risk? If at BIRAC at no point is going to get a return of investment. So the point is addressing each of these aspects differently is where I think a solution, push and pull, great, is happening at the commercialization level. What's happening at the translation level? Yes, BIRAC has a number of programs which helps translation, but not at the clinical level where it can only do so much. So I think it's not a single page thing way of looking at it. We've got to break it down into a number of aspects as to what affects that entire pipeline that we have been looking at, and then try to find and address each of these aspects differently. And that's my two-bit take on many of the discussions that's happening.
No, thank you, Mr. Balganesh. Jitendra ji, before you leave, I want to pull you into this discussion on one big concern that, Mr. Balganesh has raised, I think, Vasan, Sachin, Gauri in their presentation. And from my point of view, as a member of the Global Leaders Group, antibiotics or antimicrobials is a very different class that we are talking about. And Mr. Balganesh and others also alluded to it, because at some level, it is by its very nature, you're looking at drugs which are not going to be profitable per se. You're looking at drugs which will be used as treatments of last resort. You're also looking at the concern of resistance, which means that you will not want to overuse that drug, which means that you will want to make sure that you can conserve that drug. Now, given that, that's why, to me, the role of BIRAC becomes so critical, because public institutions have to step in where we are talking about medicines which are beyond what market can really just do. I mean, we talk about it very loosely as market failure, but it's not a market failure. It's just that these market can never be designed for medicines which have to work beyond profit. So how do you respond to some things that you've heard here? And what more can, I can already see BIRAC has done a huge amount, and it's something that we need to talk about a lot more also, in terms of how you have helped to stimulate the advances. But given the particular nature of antimicrobials, what more can BIRAC do? And how can we work, and all of us work with you to make sure that this can happen?
Yeah, they definitely, as you say, market failure, but quite not. It's not exactly a market failure. They cannot be built around a market around this. Definitely, I agree to your point. And this is the area where invisible hand, as Adam Smith pointed out, that the government comes into picture and they balance that imbalance that has been created. So that has been, we are doing that exactly, and a lot of public money, which is the taxpayers' money, is going through these grants to these companies, the startup companies, even bigger companies also, to actually subsidize this. So what we are telling to Syngene, for example, or Biocons or companies which are already, so somebody may question why, Dr. Jiten, you have to fund Syngenes and Biocons. These are very big companies, they can do everything. Or Genova, for example, which we have launched the mRNA technology. The question is, if we don't intervene, they may not do that. They may not operate in that area because as you rightly said, antibiotics, how do you make available at certain cost? People, companies who are into this, they may not enter at all. It's simple economics. So then government comes in and says that, okay, you do innovation, we will subsidize it from our side. That's what we have been doing. And in case specifically for antibiotics, I think newer approaches to new antibiotics development, which are immune to the resistance mechanism. Out of box thinking, where you say that, okay, these are not amenable to any resistance kind of mechanism which bacteria can even think of. Those type of innovations we are very, very keen to support, and I think some of them are already in the pipeline. So it's a different ball game, that we are trying. So that is one. To circumvent this problem of antibiotics development as well as restricting its use because there's a resistance, as you rightly said. So we have to balance that. The second mechanism is that companies which are already capable, capable of manufacturing, capable of they are self-sufficient, they are making money. How do we bring a platform or how do we create a platform where these companies, bigger companies, interact with the innovators, startup companies who are into innovation game? As you know, classically, innovations happens with the smaller startups mostly. It's a classical economics management concept where the bigger companies are mostly focused on their own product and they have less time to innovate other products. So the startup companies are normally they are doing the innovations, and which may not be correct 100% because we see Pfizer's of the world coming up with new molecules. But in general, I'm saying they might have acquired from some other company. So the question is, if we create a platform where bigger companies come in contact with these smaller startup companies on a more closer way, I think that would also revolutionize these kind of problems. Because, for example, if there is no funding available with BIRAC to support it after a certain level, can we create a mechanism in which a strategic partnership with a bigger company comes into picture and they invest? Because right now it's not happening because there may be insecurities from the startup companies and smaller companies that there are bigger sharks and fishes which will eat them away. But if BIRAC comes into picture, I think it can be harmonized, it can be neutralized. So I would say that there are mechanisms and we have to just make it more amenable to a working relationship and to create more mechanisms of that way. So BIRAC is already working towards creating that platform where bigger companies like Association of Biotech-led Enterprises is a association of biotech companies. We are already in talks with the ABLE, Association of Biotech-led Enterprises, to talk to the startup companies and do strategic investments, etc. Because we have helped these bigger companies also. As I said, Syngene we have funded to create a common facility for the startups. So why we have to fund Syngene? Because see, these are highly specialized games. GMPs, we are talking about precision fermentation. Startup companies may not be able to do that. So the bigger companies have the wherewithal to actually maintain these and operate these facilities where startups can come and use. So that we are working on these mechanisms, and whole biomanufacturing project is on that on that basis is that only to create these brownfield clusters where already bigger companies are operating. And antibiotic generation is no exception to this, and actually it's a much more emphasis on antibiotics development. So I think with this I close my remarks. I hope it's satisfying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just one question, Jitendraji, just because one of the big issues that has been discussed, and Vasan has raised it as well, and so has Sachin, and Mr. Bal Ganesh, and it's been in discussion in global forums as well. The need to streamline a lot of and harmonize a lot of the processes. Is there a role that you could see that that you could play in helping to do some of this, so that globally as well, some of these issues could be taken forward to see how could you streamline and cut costs? Because at the end of the day, the more we streamline, I mean, that's what we found in the COVID time. The more you streamline, the more you would cut costs in the clinical trials.
As Dr. Bhagat said that the harmonization of regulatory things also very, very important. So I am already in talks with CDSO chief that see whatever is BIRAC funded, please create a single window mechanism, because it has already gone through a vetting mechanism through your own sister organization. We have BIRAC, we have stringently vetting these companies before funding, and that's what Dr. Bhagat said. No, project has to be selected on a very right note. Otherwise, this whole exercise becomes farce, and that's what the government grants. I mean, people put questions on government mechanism that there's, you have favored some favoritism, this and that, blah, blah. So many things are there. But I can tell you with proud that BIRAC is out of all this. I mean, we are very, very net neutral, very, very stringent in selecting these companies. And I would also like to say that Bal Ganesh has some of our chair, committees, and he can vouch for me that, we have been always very, very strict in giving grants, no pressures from any, no favoritism.
I don't think that's an issue at all, Jitendra ji.
I'm saying that we are talking to CDSCO to actually create a single window mechanism for clearance of these projects which are coming to CDSCO through BIRAC. The second thing is, BIRAC has to take a lead in creating a document where we can tell to CDSC, okay, you please do these X, Y, Z, etc. to harmonize at a global level. And these are very dynamic things. For example, when biomanufacturing things comes and, biosimilar, there are different guidelines that have to emerge in the essence of time, as the time demands. So we have to talk to these bigger companies, industries actually, to guide us. So definitely the consultation process is on, and I can tell you that CDSCO will be working very closely to harmonize many of these issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dr. Kumar, and we will let you go because I know you have a flight, and we will stay in touch, and we will send you all our material, and of course, stay in touch to see how we can proceed further to catalyze the change that needs to be done. Thank you very much. Thank you. Vasan, if I may bring you in, what, at the global level, what do you see as some of the big issues that you would like to see happen beyond the push and pull, which some of them you have alluded to in your earlier comments, but what would you like to prioritize for the world as it moves ahead on this issue of a shrinking?
Sure. So, I think the panelists touched upon different topics. We will not touch the push and pull. What else is really lacking is access to clinical trial subjects, right? MDR infections caused by MDR pathogens come in different ways and in different mechanisms. So it's very important that an innovator can have access to clinical isolates coming out of patients early on during the discovery phase. That really tremendously helps to de-risk whether a new molecule is going to really work, not only in the laboratory adapted strains, but also works in the real world. That's one thing where India has a tremendous opportunity, right? All we need is a national level coordination and really bringing up the quality of microbiology labs such that the repositories can be made available to innovators from India as well as from anyone. And AMR is a global problem. So we can always, like what we saw yesterday, something spectacular, we can develop solutions for the globe coming out of India, which means we really need to provide access to clinical isolates. Second thing is access to clinical patients, right? How can we harmonize, set up trial sites with data integrity, data quality, data management, all seamlessly connected in such a way that anyone can come use India as one of a large recruitment center, along with centers from across the globe. So that way it takes care of any kind of bias, right? Geographical bias or a racial bias. So that is something, second one. Third one is regulatory, because I think there's a lot of momentum happening globally in terms of how do we harmonize. Because as an innovator, you have to run from pillar to post with each regulatory agency applying for approvals to sell. If we succeed and get to the finishing line, next comes a big challenge of, can we even make any money? And can we have any return on investment? So that is a very, very daunting and difficult process. So there is some amount of harmonization happening, but still there are some differences. So Japanese regulators are different. European regulators have a single window where you can get approval across the European Union. US is different. Australia is different. So India also is different. So that's something where proactively can our regulatory expert teams talk and really adapt what is best. And it's a two-way dialogue. We can really share some of the experiences we have had during the COVID-19. What did we do to launch vaccines? What have we done there? How could we expedite? And really apply these learnings for infectious disease, because these are really life-saving. We are starting at a situation, another 20 years, we don't do anything now, humanity is going to suffer and face the wrath of AMR. So regulatory harmonization, talking about clinical trial capacity, data sharing, and really data harmonization. Sunita, that will be my points.
Very clear. Thank you, Vasan. Very clear. Mr. Balganesh, if I may call upon you now. I mean, what Vasan has said, in your experience, would you agree with that list? Would you like to add to that list? What would you prioritize as the way ahead, beyond, of course, all the funding that we need and everything else we need at the clinical trial?
So thanks, Sunita, and I'd take this opportunity to be a little more selfish on this, not from me, from drug development perspective. Gauri pointed out that the pipeline today has traditional antibiotics and non-traditional antibiotics. I differ a little bit in the definition, but let's leave it at that. So one of the challenges which was not in Vasan's list, which I would think becomes extremely important for a country like India, is that many non-traditional antibiotics, as they are called, or antibacterials, are usually have a narrow spectrum of activity. They're not the broad spectrum where you can give it irrespective. So, which brings in its own pros and cons. We won't get into that. But the issue is like this. So that is a major issue of a pathogen in this country, in India. It's also true in some of the Southeast Asia countries, where you see 90% of that pathogen is drug resistant. Now, you move to the US and Europe, you find that the resistance is 5%. Why would the Western world fund you?
Good point.
And this is not theoretical.
No.
We guys have applied, and we have simply told that this is not a problem in our country, in the Western world, where the money is, right? So what do? I have to be completely dependent on Indian sources or sources from neighboring countries where we can develop it, where there's a problem. Does that mechanism exist today? So it's a selfish problem, I agree, from my company perspective, but it's a problem that we're going to face, because geographically, you're going to see different resistant patterns. Though I agree, the thumb rule is, if you see it in A, at some point, you're going to see it in a different country. But it's not my problem today, is the Western reaction. I'd like to put that on the table as something for consideration.
No, it's a very good point, Mr. Balganesh, and it's something that we should really put on the table, because, I mean, as people working in public health, we've always said that why is malaria and never always remained underfunded in the world, because it's our problem. But it is an issue which now is affecting other parts of the world as well, but not as much as us. And I think when it comes to antibiotic resistance, though resistance is a issue across the world, the search for novel antimicrobials, and within that, for which particular pathogen, is something which is very important. And I think that brings, it's really what Sachin also said, highlight it's about prioritization. It's about being able to get a good landscape in terms of what are the, where is it that you could get the maximum impact. And so, Sachin, in your list, how would you add to this? Because this is a fascinating, I think we're getting very close to what would be our wish list as we move ahead as a community. Sachin.
Yeah, I think, Sunita, apart from what Vasan listed, and of course, Dr. Balganesh highlighted very correctly, that we need to be learning that our problems are not going to be the others' problems. So I really start from there, that we have to understand that our problems are our problems, and they are unlikely to be the others' problem till our problems become their problems. So that's the main challenge. Now, to be able to do that, I think we'll need to learn independence. Independence of running regulatory mechanisms, independence of funding, and also in due course of time, as the issue is about the sustainability of the new drug discovery programs, I think there has to be a lot of emphasis on how do we nurture the discovery talent. To me, it looks like that we are in a very precarious situation as far as the discovery talent is concerned. Obviously, that comes out of your initial slide deck when big pharma companies made their grand exodus from the field. Situation is such that, at least I am aware of one of the big pharma companies who tried to come back into the field after 10 years of they leaving the field, and they were not able to have a group of people who can do a real world discovery. So the issue is about the discovery talent. I feel that if the initial three elements, that is regulatory, funding, and of course, the overall clinical development based on the unmet medical need is not addressed, there would be a catastrophic issue that would develop in terms of retaining the discovery talent in our country. Now, if you look at even big pharma companies and big countries, there are many countries who they don't have any discovery talent in the field of antibiotics, but they still want to develop the antibiotics, and they are critically dependent on other companies, other countries to take that molecule forward. What we try to understand that unless we set all these issues right, we are in a good position to nurture our discovery talent, expand the nucleus of people who can do antibiotic discovery. And in fact, in due course of time, we will be able to provide a very sustainable situation where years and years after, India would be in a position to churn out novel antibiotics, because this is a problem for us, and it is going to remain a problem for us. And in solving our own problems, we will be in a position to provide these solutions to even the rest of the world. So I'm really concerned about the conservation of the discovery talent all over the globe. The situation is very bad in the Western world, but two companies, and including ours, three companies in geographically small country like India operating in the field of antibiotic discovery really brings up a lot of hope. And if we really can organize our funding support system, our regulatory systems, we will be doing a good job to our further expanding the pool of this, discovery scientists. Otherwise, I'm sure that if this continues, then after 10 years, even though you pull it the money, you can bring up the infrastructure, you can do everything that a resource can buy. But what a resource cannot buy is the discovery talent, because discovery talent has to be groomed, Sunita. It is not something which you can import from anywhere else. And there are no universities in the world that can teach antibiotic discovery as a part of their curriculum. It is a work in progress, takes ages, decades, and generations to learn this art and this science. And I think if that is to go, then all the blame should go to the funding, to the funders, to the regulators, if they are not able to bring about a sustainable program. So I think there is a much bigger issue to worry rather than our next 5 to 10 years. And that worry is about how do we handle our requirement of AMR through our own resources within India. I think that is That's something that comes to my mind as a very important issue.
No, very important point, Sachin, because I think the whole issue of discovery talent and the fact that, this is where innovation is the best, is in small companies. But from all the data that Amit and his colleagues have put together, this is where a lot of companies are also closing down because they just don't have the ability to be able to nurture that talent, and we don't have the public funding for it. So I think very, very critical. So before I end this, and I will give the panelists one last word, but one question I have is from Mr. Ashwani Kumar, who's asked, besides funding, what are your take on the possible collaboration of companies, pharma companies, with research and academic labs for novel molecules? Why is that lacking in India? And has there been any collaboration that any one of you can draw his attention to? I think that would be an important question in terms of, and that's also another question that was from Mr. Ashok Madan, which is how to bring the SMEs to research. So, any more, and with this, any final words that you have? I will ask Mr. Balganesh to actually start with ending, and then I'll go around the table and take it to Gauri. And then if you all forgive me, I will take a few words at the very end. Mr.
Thanks, Sunita, and I will answer that, and you will have to excuse me in 5 minutes.
I know that, which is why exactly I called upon you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, collaboration, so that again, I look at it differently. Collaboration at early stages, collaboration at later stages. And what we're talking about, academics and pharma or biotech companies, is actually collaboration at the very early stages. Now, I have to talk about my past, but 25 years in AstraZeneca Bangalore, we had multiple collaborations with the Indian Institute of Science. We had multiple collaborations with different organizations for various purposes, not always saying, for this activity, but under the AMR umbrella. Now, so the point here is, why is this not, like you would say, at a level where you say, this has turned into gold? That has not happened. I accept this. And there are many reasons. One reason, for example, which has always been my gripe, is, today you are attracting many academics into industry. And that is becoming more and more, so that the academics are also coming on to understanding what the industry wants. How many industry people are you attracting into academics? Zero. There is hardly any community. So what we're talking about is the realization of what each other wants. Unless that perception is changed, and we have a common understanding that this is our priorities that we are trying to, this will not change. If you look at the Western world, many of the small companies were started by academicians. And then these companies know how to interact with big pharma. So it's a triangle. And we have to nurture it at that level, where we are saying the academics and industry understand what's going on, what is required. There is a two-way traffic, not necessarily one-way traffic, where you produce people in the academics, they go to the industry. I think that's one point that I would say is not really helping build further bridges between big companies and academics. Now, if you talk about small biotechs and big companies, I think there's a lot of collaboration going on. We have to wait and see, especially today with the BIRAC funding some of these type of collaborations. There's a major effort there. And so it is, so it's called the Academic Industrial Research Grant, where the academic gets money for, I'm not talking on behalf of BIRAC, but because I know it, I'm just saying, what I'm saying is there is a channel available through which we can do it. So, but AMR doesn't attract many novel projects. Why? I don't know, but that's the situation. I don't know if I tried to even get to your answer, Sunita, but that's
No,
where
you
I
did.
come from.
No, you did. And thank you. Very wise words. And clearly your experience is so huge that it's helping us to understand the way ahead. So thank you very much. And I know that you have time constraints, but thank you for joining us. And I will wrap up at the end to help us to see how do we move ahead. But before that, Sachin, please, if there's anything you would like to add to this.
I think collaborations are fundamental to the antibiotic research, and without collaboration, I think not a single product can reach to a global level for sure. If you would like to know about Wockhardt, then of course we have been stitching such collaborations for more than 10 years now. And why it is important, because these collaborations do help you to get an endorsement of your project or a specific aspect of your project, which is very important. Many a times these collaborations help you to generate an independent scientific data, which becomes extremely important from the regulatory perspective, because it gives a confidence to the regulators that a particular aspect of science has been reproduced by other organizations as well. And apart from that, I think when you have an independent investigations that have been done by leading global KOLs or experts, it adds on to the credibility to the program and to the project, and particularly in a situation when we operate out of India, where the credibility has to be extremely important as you move towards the global scale. So these collaborations are fundamentally required. I think no program can sustain without collaborations and without independent data. Just to give you an example, for one of the projects that we were discussing in my initial communication, and it is about that cefepime-zadebactam WCK 5222, our life-saving gram-negative drug that is being dubbed as life-saving. For that, we have close to 50 publications just during the development phase. The drug has not even crossed the line of phase 3, and we have 50 publications, and 95% of these publications are from independent researchers, independent teams, global KOLs, and leading investigators. I think when that happens, that allows the regulators to understand the project in greater depth, and it adds an impetus to the program, impetus to the scientific data, and that brings about a kind of a situation where the drug is understood much better and much more with respect to its therapeutic profile. So I think there is no escape to collaborations, more the better, and high quality collaborations are a big feather in the cap of a project.
Thank you. Very good. Vasan?
Sure. I think Balganesh and Sachin have covered most of the key points. Antibiotic research will not happen without collaboration, especially in an area like AMR where funding is so limited. The only way to move the needle is by collaboration. Academic collaborations typically happen in an early discovery phase, because as you move to development, the ask and the kind of hurdles are very different, which is completely outside the perspective of academics. So there is a lot of things happening in the discovery, and that's what is, as we see globally, as shown by Gauri, there's a nice pipeline that's emerging in terms of projects in the discovery phase. So it is happening. And again, partnerships in late stage is usually a fit for purpose partnerships. It could be that somebody can collaborate with an academic lab to solve a formulation challenge. It could be something where it could be a synthetic route. How do you optimize synthesis? It can happen. So it's going to be very specific and what you call a challenge-oriented collaborations. Otherwise, discovery space, it keeps happening all the time. And collaborations happen within India, also happens globally.
No, good point. Thank you. Amit, Rajeshwari, Gauri, would you like to add anything to what you've heard? And also in terms of your own agenda moving forward, anything that you would like to say? Amit?
So I would just like to say, very enriching discussion, lots of learning for us. Clearly, there are lots of questions, which I hope that when we get back to the respective panelists, we will be able to have some more in-depth details. But clearly for us, there's a lot of encouraging, I would say encouraging understanding. The understanding is encouraging in the sense that, yes, it can happen, and it's not just about funding. There is a lot that also can be done other than funding. And that perhaps is not a small chunk of it. It's fairly sizable. So thank you very much, panelists. And we can just let you know that we'll be at it and we'll come back to you.
Rajeshwari, Gauri, anything you want to add?
Yes, very briefly, Sunita ji. I think Gauri and I have had the opportunity to speak to these the three stakeholders even before during our research. And I think today was absolutely different because we were hearing all three of them together at one platform. It was a tremendously different experience. This is one webinar, one discussion which I think all of us as AMR team would like to open again and listen right after this is, we sign off. And one more thing, like what we saw yesterday, where Indian science has taken us, and speaking today to Indian developers, it just gives me and I think the AMR team more confidence that if these challenges, which is beyond just funds, if these challenges can be worked around. And I think we are a small drop in the ocean, but we can definitely push for these challenges to be addressed, and it can take us a long way to go. I would like to close at that.
Gauri?
Yeah, I would just like to add, of course, everything else has been covered, but this has been a very enriching discussion. There's so many aspects that have come into picture. Things like, it's our problem and we need to solve it. And just funding is not enough, harmonization, this and that. And there's so many things that are on the table right now. And yeah, so all of these need to be step by step, I think, addressed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my point of view also, if I may just wrap this up, firstly to thank everybody, but also to say, I've heard a lot today, which is very different from what I've heard at Global Forum. Because when we discuss the shrinking of the antibiotic pipeline, I think what I have heard today, two things stand out. One, what more can be done? It's not just a debate of push and pull. It is also to look at what else can be done to make sure that both collaboration happens, that the cost and the speed at which companies which have innovated can take their products out, whether it is the regulatory challenges, whether it is what Sachin raised is money to be able to do clinical trials in other parts of the world, whether it is learning from COVID to see how could you reduce the steps that are needed by harmonization so that you can overall make sure that a drug which is promising, which also is something which is needed for large numbers of people in the world, which means it's fit for purpose for countries like us, not just in terms of broad resistance, is something that gets the public support and is able to take the next step. So I think that's very clear to me that there is an agenda beyond just talking about funding. And I think, Amit, that clearly is something that we as CSE need to put on the table. We need to talk about a lot more, and we need to understand better from the stakeholders so that as we converse on this within the country and globally, we can highlight the need to move on different aspects of the shrinking pipeline. That's one. The second learning that I think is very important, and I think this is where we need to work more, is to see how already in India, you are beginning to see, I mean, we've always been seen as the generic capital. We are seen as the manufacturers of antibiotics, but we need to see how can public support be used, public funding be used, not just for making sure that there is innovation, but also to make sure that we can get these drugs on the table. And this is where it's also about what's our priorities, what is needed for us, what Sachin pointed out, what Mr. Balkrishnan pointed out, very important for us to understand that we target what we need. And we are able to then produce this for the rest of the world as well. So I think those are very interesting new ideas and new understanding that we've had. So thank you very much for sharing so openly and so graciously your time, but also so openly your understanding with us. We will continue to work on this subject. Our third webinar is going to be there in this month. coming month, but then we will try and consolidate a lot of these learnings and see how we can intervene both nationally as well as globally so that we can push this towards some action. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you everyone who's been with us so patiently listening and for all your very, very encouraging comments on the chat box. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for the wonderful session. Thanks to all the participants.
Thank you.